Happy Thursday. I have a Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect as usual. And we are back after a week of vacation.
All right, so when doing an RFE split squat, like a rear foot elevated split squat,
Rear foot elevated split squat. Okay.
right? Would you rather the big toe be in contact with the bench or the top arc of the foot? You'll see people like try to use different strategies, and I get that it might like reinforce different patterns on the opposite hip that you're training.
Yeah.
But and I guess it is context specific, but like, what have you found to be like your go-to?
Do you want to know what the difference is?
Yeah, let's go over it.
Okay, so this is actually useful to know. I don't know how valuable it is from a return on investment standpoint, but the difference is where the load on the back leg is going to go as far as the contribution of joints. Okay, so if you are in an ER position of the foot, so it'd be like plantar flexion supination, which would be like the dorsum of the foot is supported on a bench or something like that. You're going to use more of the backside hip to push yourself up and out of the split squat. Okay. Now keep in mind that when you elevate the rear foot, you shift load anteriorly anyway. So if you look at like the last research that I saw, they were using a bench, and I can't remember how high it was, but it's like a typical gym bench. And I think that the split was like 80, 85, or the maximum load to the front leg that they could produce was 85% of the total load. So it's body weight load plus bar, right? But if you use like one of those padded bars and you hook your foot over it and you dorsiflex, you use more of the backside knee to distribute the load onto the back leg. Once again, it's not terribly valuable, but I could see little tweaks here and there that it might be useful to distinguish between the two. But it's also going to direct you towards where somebody might be lacking some movement that will influence the position and the outcome of the split squat, right? So think about, as I sit down, so if I have the dorsum of my foot supported, knowing I'm going to load, like I'm going to be pushing through what would be traditional hip extension coming out of that. It's like, okay, is that really what I want to do? Or do I want to shift more of that load to the hip extension on the lead leg? And so again, people would call this single leg training. It's like, well, okay, if I got 2 feet in contact with something, I'm using both sides. It's just how am I using it? Right. And again, it's a subtle, but if you do both of them, like just go to the gym today and do both of them, you'll feel the difference. You'll feel the difference in where you're distributing the load. But you can manipulate the height as well. And again, that's going to push some of that load more towards the back leg. The question mark is like, what do you want the outcome to be? I have people that come in and they say, well, don't I have to do a split squat this way? And it's like, well, no, there are many ways to execute. It just depends on your intended outcome.
I have a client, female, narrow, like typical presentation of a narrow, goes down 2 inches in a goblet squat and then drops, knees clack in, everything. Like just
Nice.
it's really a sight to see.
Okay.
From a progression standpoint, would you recommend box squatting with the goblet still anteriorly, or would you recommend some sort of like a back squat variant to reinforce more compressive strategies?
Well, okay, so here's what could potentially happen if you went straight to the back squat. Okay. So because of the position of load and the strategy to hold bar position, you're going to create a compressive strategy in the upper thorax, okay, that's going to drive pressure downward. So the first question that you want to ask is, why is this person accelerating towards the ground in the first place?
They can't manage pressures internally. They're
Okay, and that's a great answer. Now explain it.
Like as soon as they reach a certain point, pelvic bones reorient and the guts spill straight down.
Right. So they're just following where the volume is going. So we can only move into a space that we can expand.
Okay.
That's how we move. We move into a space by expanding. So we compress somewhere and then we expand somewhere else, and that's the direction that we go, right? So when you see someone accelerating straight down into a squat, okay,
because they're expanding straight down.
they're expanding straight down, right? Okay. So the pelvic diaphragm is most likely eccentrically oriented, and so they're going to follow where the expansion goes, okay? So more often than not, it's when you see that acceleration, it's somebody that cannot produce enough concentric orientation to resist or reverse directions. So if anybody, okay, since we went over everybody's PR deadlift, let's put a PR squat on your back for a second. If you've ever had a scenario where you sat down into a very, very heavy squat and you started to come up and you went right back down, okay? That's the same scenario. It's not that you don't have concentric orientation, you just can't produce enough pressure to overcome the downward forces that are associated with the external load and the internal pressures at the same time, okay? So it's literally the same scenario. Okay, so what would you do under those circumstances to raise your ability to come up out of that deep squat with a very, very heavy load? It's the same strategy that you're going to use for anybody else, right? So do they have to back squat? Is there a reason that they would have to back squat? If there isn't, then what I would do is let's establish some element of control in a position that you can be successful first and foremost, right? So if I just want to make a pretty squat first, which is probably under most circumstances what your goal is going to be, it stands to reason that I don't want to create another force downward that they're going to have to manage when they can't manage the first one. Right? So it might be that you take any external load away.
Or even like strapping a band to a pull-up bar and unloading it, no?
You can definitely do that. Right. So there's a few ways to do that, but yeah, that's what a reverse. So the reverse band type of squat, right, is to reduce the downward forces that are associated with the load.
Okay.
Velocity is demonstrated using an expansion based external rotation strategy, right? Internal rotation and compression slow down time. They literally just slow it down, right? So you can't be fast as you produce force. So since you and I talk baseball all the time, if I'm trying to throw a baseball, 90 plus miles an hour, I better not be in a concentric orientation for very long, because all I'm going to do is slow myself down. Right? Yeah. The idea is just to be prolific, and that's how the good ideas arise. I talk about Dolly Parton a lot. I'm a fan of her. I'm not a fan of her music, because she has constructed something like all by herself. But there's a documentary on Netflix about her, and she has written over 3,000 songs in her career. My point is like she wrote 3,000 songs, but we can only talk about maybe 4 or 5, and yet we all know who Dolly Parton is. Right. So it's not about the fact that she wrote 3,000 great songs that will live forever. It's the fact that she wrote 3,000 songs, and these 5 will stick in everybody's head forever.